Nathan sent me here, Diana said.
How long have you lived here?
19 months.
I never sent you away. You stole millions while isolating my mother.
You abandoned this house for 2 years. I recorded every order you gave.
Then you're finished.
Will you leave again?
I should have come home sooner.
Are you staying now?
This time, I'm staying.
The private jet touched down at Asheville Regional just after noon, and Nathan Calloway was already behind. He'd rescheduled this trip twice, once for a board meeting in Frankfurt, once for a contract delay in Dublin that cost 3 weeks and a lot of patience. 14 months since he'd last stood on North Carolina soil. 14 months of video calls with Diana, monthly reports from Lionel, and the quiet assumption that home was being held together in his absence the way it always had been. Standing on the tarmac with his carry-on and the October light sharp against the mountains, Nathan felt the particular weight of a man who has been efficient for a very long time and is only now beginning to wonder what efficiency cost him. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. He'd had his driver pick up the rental car ahead of time. He didn't call Diana from the airport. He told himself it was because he wanted to surprise her. That was mostly true. The estate was 40 minutes from the airport, up into the Blue Ridge, past the last commercial stretch, down a 2-lane road that wound through second-growth hardwood until the entrance gate appeared in the trees. Nathan had built the gate himself, or rather he'd designed it. Stone pillars, black iron, no nameplate. The kind of gate that doesn't announce anything. When you know, you know. Diana was waiting on the front steps when he pulled up. She had the kind of stillness that looked like warmth, arms, slightly open, smile early and natural, dressed well, but not overdressed. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Nathan watched her for a half-second before he got out of the car, and in that half-second, he noticed something he had not consciously registered before Diana was performing. He couldn't have said why he thought that. The performance was flawless. "You look tired," she said, pulling him into a hug. 14 hours door to door. Come inside. I had Mara. She stopped. Corrected. I had the kitchen stocked. You hungry, Nathan? Noticed the correction. Where's Mama? Diana pulled back with an expression of easy reassurance. She's down at the cabin. You know how she loves the afternoon down there. The light on the river is incredible this time of year. Let her have her piece. She'll come up for dinner. Nathan set his bag down in the front hall. The house smelled the same cedar, something herbal from the kitchen, the faint mustiness of rooms that are maintained but not lived in every day. He scanned the entry. The side table where Ruth kept her reading glasses and her crossword book was empty. She moved her things to the cabin, he asked. She's been very settled down there, Diana said, moving toward the kitchen. Tea or something stronger, you deserve it. Tea's fine, he followed her. How long has she been at the cabin? She started spending more time there last spring. You know how she is. Once she gets comfortable somewhere, she doesn't like to be disturbed. Diana filled the kettle. Her movements were smooth. She's happy, Nathan. She was just telling me last week how much she loves the mornings down there. Ruth had never liked being alone. She had lived alone for the 7 years since Nathan's father died, and she'd managed it. But she had never liked it. She liked conversation, liked the kitchen, liked the sound of a house being used. Nathan had known this about his mother since he was 9 years old. He drank his tea. He let Diana talk about the estate repairs, about the London expansion, about a dinner she'd planned for the following weekend with the Harmon family. He asked the right questions. He watched her hands when she thought he wasn't watching. After dinner, he walked outside. The rear garden sloped down toward the tree line, and beyond the trees, 40 minutes down the ridge, the river ran through a narrow valley. The cabin sat where the path met the water. He had built it 12 years ago as a weekend retreat somewhere to write, to think somewhere nobody could call him. It had no reliable heating. The windows were single pane. It was not built for winter. He pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. 4. Voicemail. He hadn't spoken directly to Ruth in 6 weeks. Diana had relayed messages. Ruth was sleeping. Ruth was reading. Ruth was having a good day. Ruth sent her love. He had accepted this. He had been in the middle of a bond restructuring in Edinburgh. The porch light was on behind him. He didn't move. At the edge of the rear garden, just before the tree line swallowed the slope, he could see it, a faint amber light in the dark mass of the forest. Far below. Small and still, the way a light looks when it has been burning alone for a long time. She turns it off at night. Diana's voice came from behind him, close and quiet. She likes to sleep early. The quiet's good for her. Nathan looked at the light in the trees. "When did you last go down to see her?" he asked. A pause. Just a beat. "Earlier this week. She was in good spirits." He nodded. He did not turn around. Below in the dark forest, the amber light held steady. He thought about the side table in the front hall, empty of reading glasses and crossword books. He thought about Diana's half-second correction. Mara, and then not Mara. He thought about his mother's number ringing out in the dark. He thought, "I have been away for 14 months, and everything Diana has told me about this house is a version of events I have no way to verify." He kept watching the light. Nathan was up before 5. He dressed quietly, took his coat from the hall closet, and was out the back door before Diana's bedroom light came on. The October dark was complete, no moon, just the solid weight of mountain sky. He used his phone's flashlight for the first 100 yards until his eyes adjusted. Then he clicked it off and let the path lead him. He hadn't walked the ridge trail in 2 years. It had been maintained when he left. Hector kept the paths clear as part of his regular groundskeeping. Now the trail pushed back. Branches crossed at shoulder height. The underbrush had filled in along both edges. He moved through it carefully, and the minutes added up, and the air got colder as he descended into the river valley. 40 minutes. He had not expected 40 minutes. The cabin materialized out of the tree line, the way things do in the dark, first. A shape, then a structure, then something specific and wrong. The propane tank beside the door was small, the kind you use for camping. The firewood stack was covered with a blue tarp, but the stack was low, 2 or 3 days' worth maybe. One window had a strip of duct tape running along the lower seal holding something in place. A single light burned inside. Ruth was on the porch when he came through the last stand of hemlocks. She was in her heavy robe and wool socks, both hands around a mug, watching the river. She saw him come through the trees and went very still. She did not stand. She did not call out. She watched him cross the narrow clearing between the tree line and the cabin porch, the way a person watches something they are not sure they should trust yet. He stopped at the porch steps, looked at her. "Nathan," she said. "Mama." She looked older than he remembered. Not diminished. Ruth Calloway had never been a diminished woman, but thinner. Her face had the precision that comes from weight loss. The planes more defined, the tendons in her neck visible. She held the mug with both hands, the way people do when their hands are cold, and the mug is the warmest thing nearby. He climbed the steps and sat in the other chair. For a moment, they just looked at the river. It moved fast over the rocks in the middle channel, slower along the banks. The light was beginning to come, not dawn, yet just the first graying at the ridgeline across the water. "How long are you staying?" Ruth asked. "I don't know yet." That's usually how it starts. She said it without bitterness. just accuracy. He looked at her medication organizer on the small table beside her chair. 7 compartments, 4 of them visibly empty. He looked at the single-burner propane cooker visible through the open cabin door. He looked at the cot-style bed inside, not the queen from the guest suite, not even a proper twin, but a narrow folding cot with a sleeping bag on top and a wool blanket folded at the foot. "Mama, how long have you been living down here?" Ruth looked at the river. Since March of last year. He did the math. 19 months. Diana said you asked to come down here. Ruth turned to look at him then. Diana said I asked. She repeated it carefully, as if hearing the sentence for the first time, and finding it interesting. She said you'd been spending more time here, that you were happy down at the river. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She looked back at the water. Diana told me, she said slowly, that you thought the cabin would be good for me. More peaceful, less in the way. A pause. She said you'd mentioned it before you left for London, that you'd set it up. Nathan was very still. I never said that. Ruth set her mug down on the table. She looked at her hands. They were rougher than he remembered the hands of someone doing more physical work than she used to, washing by hand, carrying wood. She was 69 years old, and she had been carrying firewood to a cabin in the Blue Ridge for 19 months. I know, she said quietly. When did you realize she was lying? Ruth looked at him with something steady and unsurprised in her eyes. Month 4, she said. Maybe month 3. When I asked to come back up to the house for Thanksgiving and Diana said you'd called from London and said the timing wasn't good. She paused. You always come home for Thanksgiving. You haven't missed it in 20 years. Not once, not even when you were building the company. You flew back for Thanksgiving. Nathan's jaw tightened, but I thought Ruth stopped. Started again. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe things had changed. Maybe I'd become difficult to have around, and nobody wanted to say so. So I stayed. I didn't want to call and ask you and find out it was true. You should have called. My phone stopped working properly around month 5. The new one Diana had sent over. She said it without emphasis. The calls dropped. I thought it was the signal down here. It's possible it was the signal. It was not the signal. Nathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He looked at the cabin, the cracked window seal, the low firewood, the propane canister, and he thought about the main house 40 minutes up the ridge. 3 fireplaces, central heating. A kitchen stocked with the things Diana told him she'd had the kitchen stocked with. A woman who was good at presenting a version of events that required nothing of her audience except acceptance. I'm going to move you back up to the house, he said. Ruth picked up her mug again. Today. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once the way she had always nodded when a decision was right and didn't require commentary. Nathan started to stand. His phone buzzed again. He took it out. An unknown number. A text message. Mr. Calloway, my name is Mara Hendricks. I used to work at your estate. I have something you need to see. Please don't tell Diana I contacted you. He read it twice. He looked up at the river, the cold water moving through the valley, the light strengthening at the ridge. He texted back, when and where. The response came in under a minute. Whenever you can get away. I'm in Asheville. There's a diner on Merriman Ave. I'll be there all morning. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at his mother. Who raised you? Ruth asked, watching his face. He almost smiled. You did, then trust your instincts. She stood steadier than he'd feared. I'm going to pack my things. It won't take long. I don't have much down here. That sentence, quiet, factual, without self-pity, was the one that cost Nathan the most. He told Ruth he needed to run an errand in town before the move. He didn't tell her more than that. She understood the way Ruth always understood, that some things needed space to be handled before they were spoken about aloud. He drove to Asheville with the windows down. The October air at this elevation was sharp and clean, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. He found the diner on Merriman without trouble, a narrow storefront with a hand-lettered sign and booths along both walls. The lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet. A woman in the last booth raised her hand when he walked in. Mara Hendricks was in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the direct gaze of someone who had spent years watching people closely and drawing accurate conclusions. She had a folder on the table in front of her and a cup of coffee she'd been nursing for a while. She stood briefly when he approached, then sat back down. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "You worked for us 11 years, Nathan said, sitting across from her. "If you have something, I want to hear it." She pushed the folder to the center of the table but didn't open it. "I want to tell you the context first, so you understand what you're looking at." He nodded. Mara had started at the estate 4 years before Nathan moved to London. She knew Ruth well, had managed the main house alongside her for years, learned her preferences, her schedule, the way she liked the kitchen organized. When Nathan left for London, Mara stayed on. Diana became the day-to-day manager of the household. That transition, Mara said, had not been immediate. It had happened gradually over the first 6 months. She started asking me to clear decisions through her before acting on them. That's normal. She's the wife. She has authority. But then it was checking in about Mrs. Calloway's schedule, who was visiting her, whether Mrs. Calloway had called anyone. Mara kept her voice even. By month 8, Diana had taken over Mrs. Calloway's phone account. She told me it was because of billing simplification. She upgraded the phone in March of last year. March, Nathan said. That's when my mother moved to the cabin. The same week, Mara said. She opened the folder. The photographs were taken on a personal phone, time stamped. The first set showed the cabin in winter frost, visible on the window glass, the firewood stack much lower than it had been in autumn. Ruth's silhouette visible through the window. The second set showed the main house during the same period, warm light. The dining room table set Diana visible in one photo, hosting a dinner Nathan didn't recognize. She was keeping the main house for social events, while your mother was down at the river, Mara said. Entertaining from it. I was asked to manage the catering. He turned to the written log, Mara's handwriting dated entries. The entries were brief and factual dates, what was said, who was present, what changed. November 14th. Diana instructs me not to arrange transportation for Mrs. C to medical appointments without her approval first. She says this is to manage Mrs. C's schedule. Mrs. C's next rheumatology appointment is December 3rd. December 3rd? Mrs. C did not attend rheumatology appointment. Diana said she'd called the office to reschedule. When I asked Mrs. C about it, she said she hadn't been told about the reschedule. She seemed confused. He kept reading. March 8th. Mrs. C moved to cabin. Diana tells staff this is Nathan's preference for the sake of his remote work arrangements when he returns. Several staff members question this privately. Nathan is not due home for months and has not been working from the estate. I say nothing. March 22nd. Mrs. C's new phone delivered. Diana sets it up herself. She tells Mrs. C it's the same as her old phone, just updated. I notice the new phone requires Diana's account credentials to access the carrier app. Then the audio file. Mara had emailed it to him while he was driving over. She showed him the sent timestamp on her phone. He put in one earbud and listened, Diana's voice clear and close to the microphone. Make sure Mrs. Calloway understands that the cabin arrangement is what Nathan prefers. If she asks about coming up to the house, just tell her it's not a good time. She won't push if she thinks it's Nathan's decision. She never pushes when she thinks she's protecting Nathan. He took out the earbud. Mara watched him. I recorded it on my personal phone. I kept the recordings because I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't call you directly. The estate contact form goes through Diana's inbox, and I didn't have your personal number. I sent 2 emails through the form. I don't think you ever received them. I didn't. He sat with the folder open in front of him. The server came by and he ordered coffee he didn't need. When she left, he asked, "Why did Diana fire you 3 months ago?" She said I'd been overstepping, that I'd been discussing household matters with Mrs. Calloway directly instead of routing through her. Which was true. Mara folded her hands on the table. Mrs. Calloway asked me to let her know if the firewood ran low so she could request more. I arranged to have wood delivered without Diana's approval. That was the stated reason. Nathan closed the folder. He looked at the window, the street outside, the ordinary Tuesday morning foot traffic on Merriman Avenue. There's one more thing, Mara said. She reached into her coat pocket and slid something across the table. A business card, a Raleigh law firm, family law specialty. She turned it face down. On the back, in Diana's precise handwriting, a column of notes, account numbers Nathan recognized as joint holdings, a property address in Charleston, a figure net estiturn, 3.1 and a date circled twice. 2 weeks from today. I found it in the kitchen waste bin 4 months ago. I took it because I didn't know what it meant yet. I think I know now. Nathan picked up the card. He looked at the date. He looked at the account numbers. He thought about the folder in front of him, and the audio recording, and the photograph of his mother through a frosted cabin window in December, and the 19 months of mornings she had spent at a river she hadn't asked to live beside. He thought Diana began planning this before she moved Ruth to the cabin. The cabin was part of the plan. He set the business card back down. He looked at Mara. You still have the original recordings? Yes. I'm going to need a statement. From you. Formal, written, dated. He paused. And I'm going to need you to talk to my attorney. I'll do whatever helps, Mara said. She was good to me for a long time, Mrs. Calloway. I should have done more sooner. Nathan shook his head. You kept records. You held them. That's not nothing. He picked up the folder. Can I keep this? I made copies. He stood. Left cash on the table for the coffee. Outside on the sidewalk, he called Lionel Garrett. The phone rang twice. When Lionel answered, Nathan spoke without preamble. I need an hour. Today. Not at the estate. Lionel's voice shifted, the professional register, the one that meant he was already thinking. I can be at my office by 2. What's the issue? Nathan looked up at the October sky, pale blue, cloudless, the mountains visible in 3 directions. My wife, he said, has been building a separate financial life for 2 years. And I think she moved my mother into the woods to do it. Lionel Garrett had been Nathan's estate attorney for 16 years, since the first year the company turned serious revenue, and Nathan realized he needed someone who could think ahead of him legally. Lionel was 62, silver-haired, methodical, and the kind of man who heard difficult news without his expression changing. He heard Nathan out that afternoon in his office on Pack Square, the full account, Mara's folder, the audio clip, the business card with the circled date. And when Nathan finished, Lionel set down his pen and said, Tell me about the estate restructuring documents Diana sent you over the past 2 years, Nathan thought. She sent me several things. I signed what you sent me. I signed what she sent. There were beneficiary updates, some LLC restructuring she said was for tax efficiency. Did you review them before signing? Nathan paused. I reviewed the summaries. Lionel nodded once without judgment. I need to be honest with you. Diana consulted me 3 times in the past year and a half regarding estate planning. She characterized those conversations as routine planning on your behalf. I had no reason to question the framing. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad. I should have contacted you directly to confirm your instructions. I didn't. I'm telling you that clearly so we can move forward with accurate information. What did she do? Lionel walked him through it. 3 joint accounts with altered beneficiary designations, not to Nathan's listed secondary beneficiary, his mother, but to an entity Lionel had flagged at the time as unusual. A holding company established in Delaware, Diana's name only. A property in Charleston, a rental property from Diana's prior financial life that Nathan had believed was sold in 2019, had been quietly retained and refinanced 8 months ago. The equity extraction, $800,000, then the brokerage accounts. 2 of the 4 joint brokerage accounts had been restructured with sole access provisions, meaning Diana could transact without Nathan's co-signature. That change had been made with documents Nathan had signed buried in a package of routine updates. The total repositioned Lionel's preliminary estimate was $3.1 million. Claire Ashby, the forensic accountant he recommended, would refine that number. She's been building an exit, Nathan said. That's what the structure suggests, Lionel said carefully. The date on the card 2 weeks from now is significant. If she planned to initiate divorce proceedings on that date, the financial positioning makes sense. You'd have come home, found everything apparently in order, and by the time you and counsel understood what had happened, she'd have had a significant head start. And my mother. Lionel looked at him. Ruth would have noticed, Nathan said. She managed household finances for years when I was building the company. She knows how accounts work, what our holdings are. If Diana was restructuring, Ruth would have asked questions. He stopped. So Diana moved her to the cabin where she couldn't see anything. Lionel was quiet for a moment. I think that's a reasonable inference. Nathan drove back to the estate in the late afternoon, the October light going gold and then orange through the windshield. He had asked Lionel to begin a protective filing not yet, not until they had more from Claire Ashby, but to have it ready to move quickly if needed. Lionel said he'd have it prepared within 24 hours. Diana was in the kitchen when Nathan came through the back door. She had music on something low and composed, and she was making dinner, actually cooking, not directing staff, which was unusual enough that Nathan noticed it. She looked up when he came in. Her expression was open and warm. Good errand, she asked. Fine. He poured himself water. I want to bring Mama up to the house. Tonight. Diana turned down the burner. She turned to face him with that expression of careful, loving concern. Of course, if that's what you want. She paused. Though she's been so settled, I worry about disrupting her routine. She really has found a kind of peace down there, Nathan. She's been down there 19 months, Diana. I know. Her voice was understanding, patient. It does sound like a long time when you say it that way. But she chose, I want to move her tonight. Diana looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, controlled, and then her expression resettled. I'll arrange for Hector to help carry her things. I'll go myself. She might be asleep by now. Then I'll wait. Diana turned back to the stove. Her shoulders were perfectly still. Whatever you think is best, she said. Dinner will be ready in an hour. He went outside. The sun was behind the ridge now, the light going out of the valley fast the way it does in the mountains in October. At the edge of the rear garden, Hector was raking leaves near the tool shed. Nathan crossed to him. Hector was 54, had worked the grounds for 8 years. He stopped raking when Nathan approached and held the rake with both hands in the careful way of a man who is about to have a conversation he's been expecting. "How often does someone go down to the cabin?" Nathan asked. Hector looked at the ground for a moment. "Not often, sir. Mrs. Diana said Mrs. Calloway preferred to be left alone down there." He stopped. "That's what I was told." "Did you believe it?" A pause. "No, sir. Not really." He looked up. "I left firewood down there twice without being asked. Mrs. Diana told me to stop, said I was bothering Mrs. Calloway. I didn't go back." His voice was flat, the flatness of a man ashamed of something he can't undo. "I should have called you. I didn't know how to reach you directly." Nathan put his hand briefly on the man's shoulder. "I'm going down to get her. Tonight. I'll need the path lit, flashlights, whatever you have." Hector straightened. "I'll walk with you." Nathan shook his head. "I'll go alone. But I need you to do something else. I need you to tell me clearly everything you observed at this property in the last 19 months. Everything that seemed wrong. Can you do that?" Hector met his eyes. "Yes, sir. I can." "Tomorrow morning, then." He went inside to tell Diana he was going. She was at the stove stirring, and she said, "Fine, of course, take a flashlight from the hall closet." He took the flashlight. He went down the ridge path in the growing dark. When he reached the cabin, the light was on. He knocked. Ruth opened the door, and she looked at his face, the set of his jaw, the particular stillness of a man who has been given information he cannot unfind. And she said, "You found out." He said, "I found out some of it." She stepped back and let him in. The cabin was warmer than it had been that morning. Ruth had got the propane burner going, and the space had trapped enough heat to be bearable. She made tea on it without asking if he wanted any, which was something Nathan had always found steadying about his mother. She made tea the way other people cleared their throats before hard conversations, as a way of giving the room a moment to settle. He sat on the cabin's one proper chair. Ruth sat on the edge of the cot with the mug in both hands. She watched him wait, and she let him. "Tell me how it started," he said. She told it clearly in sequence. The way she had probably rehearsed it in her mind on many of the mornings she'd spent alone down here. Diana had come to her in mid-March of the previous year, with what she described as good news. Nathan had suggested before leaving for London that the cabin might be a wonderful retreat for Ruth. More peace, more nature, less of the main house's formal rhythm. He'd thought she'd like it, and I thought. Ruth paused. "I thought it was possible. You had mentioned once, years ago, that you thought I spent too much time indoors, that you worried about me being sedentary." She looked at him. "People hear what they're prepared to hear, Nathan. I was prepared to believe that you'd thought about me and made a kind arrangement. I wanted to believe that." She had come to the cabin expecting to stay a few weeks. By the end of the first month, when she raised the question of returning to the main house, Diana had told her gently that Nathan had mentioned just in passing in one of their calls that he needed the house quieter for his eventual remote work visits. That Ruth's presence, her schedule, her habits, required the household to adjust in ways Nathan found distracting when he was trying to work. She said this carefully, Ruth said. She never said anything harsh. It was always framed as something you'd prefer, something that would help you. She paused. That's the mechanism. She used your name. She used my desire not to be difficult for you. By month 4, the phone had become a problem. Ruth noticed that Nathan's calls seemed shorter, more distracted, that he rarely asked specific questions about her life anymore. Diana explained this by saying Nathan was under enormous pressure in London. Ruth did not question it. By month 5, the phone upgrade had arrived, and after that, when Ruth tried to call Nathan directly, the calls dropped consistently. She assumed it was the cell signal in the valley. She'd had one moment of clarity Thanksgiving. Nathan had not come home. Diana told her he'd called from a board dinner in Frankfurt, brief he sent his love, and that this year was just too complicated logistically. Ruth had stood at the cabin window that evening and watched the main house lit up for a dinner Diana was hosting, and she had thought carefully and clearly, "This is not right." And then she had thought, "But what if I am the one who is wrong? I raised 2 boys without a net," Ruth said quietly. "I didn't have the luxury of being wrong and having it matter. I learned to question myself before I questioned anyone else." She looked at her hands. Diana knew that about me, or she figured it out. She reached under the cot and pulled out a simple composition notebook, black and white cover dog-eared at the corners. She set it on her knee. "I started keeping this in April of last year," she said. "I wrote down everything she said to me about you, every message she delivered, every explanation. Every time she told me you'd called, but I'd been asleep, or you'd sent your love, but there was nothing specific. I wrote the dates. I wrote exactly what she said." She looked at the notebook. "I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I needed something to be true. Something I could go back to and verify that my memory wasn't confused." Nathan reached out. Ruth placed the notebook in his hands. He opened it to a random page. November 2nd. "Diana says Nathan called this morning while I was walking. She says he asked how I was doing. She says he sounded busy. He did ask to be called back. I asked Diana to give me his London number so I could call him during office hours. She said she'd send it over. She did not send it." He closed the notebook. He looked at his mother, this woman who had spent 19 months writing down evidence in a composition notebook, because she didn't know what else to do with the truth. And he thought about the word careful, how it applied to Ruth, how it had been used against her. "I'm moving you to the main house tonight," he said. Ruth looked at him steadily. "Diana is in the main house. I know." She was quiet for a moment. "You've spoken to an attorney this afternoon." She nodded. "All right." She stood. She looked around the cabin, the propane burner, the stack of library books, the portable radio. "Do I need to take everything tonight, just what you need for now?" "I'll have everything else moved tomorrow." Ruth went to the narrow shelf beside the door and took down a small framed photograph Nathan as a young man, maybe 30, standing on a completed construction site in a hard hat. He'd forgotten to return to the site manager. She'd had it in her bedroom at the main house. She held it for a moment. "I kept this here," she said, "so I could remember that the version of you Diana described, too busy, too distracted, too changed by success to think about home, was not the version I raised." She put the photograph in the bag she'd been packing since morning. "I was right about that, even if I was wrong about everything else." Nathan shouldered the bag. He opened the cabin door and held it. Ruth Calloway walked out of the river cabin for the last time, and the two of them started up the ridge together. The path was dark, and the forest was close on both sides, and the 40 minutes going up took longer than the 40 minutes going down, but neither of them rushed it. When they came out onto the rear lawn of the main house, the lights were on in the kitchen, and Diana's bedroom window was lit. A silhouette moved behind the curtain. Nathan took his mother's arm and walked her to the front door. Ruth's bedroom was on the east wing, first door on the right, the room she had used since Nathan first brought her to the estate 7 years ago. Large window, southeast exposure, good morning light. Nathan had chosen it for her himself. When he opened the door that night, it was a reading room. Bookcase, 2 armchairs, a small writing desk. Ruth stood in the doorway and looked at it without expression. "I'll need somewhere to sleep tonight," she said. "The guest suite," Nathan said. He turned on the light. "I'll move the furniture out of here tomorrow." Ruth looked at the bookcase. Her books were gone, replaced by a curated selection of oversized art volumes. "All right," she said. He settled her in the guest suite. He made sure she had water, her medication organizer. He told her to call his cell if she needed anything in the night, and pointed out that the signal was better up here than at the cabin. He said it without irony. She understood the intent and thanked him. He went downstairs. Diana was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner. She heard him come in and turned. She looked past him, waiting to see if Ruth was behind him, and when she wasn't, when it was just Nathan alone, something shifted in Diana's expression. Recalibration. A new set of calculations beginning. "She's in the guest suite," Nathan said. "I'm going to move her things back into her bedroom tomorrow, of course." Diana's voice was smooth. "I've been meaning to restore that room, I just hadn't gotten around to it." Nathan sat at the kitchen table. He was very tired and very clear-headed, at the same time the particular state of someone who has been given a great deal of information and is not yet finished processing it. "Why did you fire Mara?" he asked. A pause. She was overstepping, managing things that weren't her responsibility. Diana dried her hands on a towel. "Why do you ask?" "I met with her today." Diana set down the towel. She turned to look at him fully. This was new. She hadn't known about Mara, hadn't anticipated that particular variable. For the first time since Nathan had arrived home, he could see the performance's seams. "She contacted you," Diana said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, Nathan." Diana sat across from him. Her voice went into its most careful register, warm, reasonable, just slightly injured. "Mara had issues with my management of the household. She didn't respond well to structure. What she told you, whatever she told you, comes from someone who resented being corrected. She had photographs," Nathan said, "of the cabin in December, of my mother through a frosted window, firewood running low." He paused. "She had a recording of you asking her to keep my mother in the cabin by telling her it was my preference." Silence. Diana looked at him for a long time. Nathan looked back. He had the folder on the chair beside him, Mara's folder. He did not open it. He did not need to. "I was protecting you," Diana said finally. "Your mother is Nathan. She can be difficult. She questions everything. She has opinions about how this house is run, about your finances, about every decision you make. You never see it because she's on her best behavior when you're home. But for 2 years, I've been managing her while you were building something significant on another continent, and some distance was necessary for both of us. You moved her to a cabin with cracked window seals and a camping propane burner. It's insulated in December." Diana's jaw tightened briefly. "Then I'll take responsibility for not monitoring the condition of the cabin closely enough." That was a failure of oversight. Was it a failure of oversight that her phone calls to me went through your account? The silence this time was longer. She was confused about the device, Diana said. She wrote it down, Nathan said. Every day. For 19 months. What you told her, what you didn't tell her, the calls that never connected, the messages you said I sent. She kept a journal. He paused. It's detailed, Diana. Dates, everything. Nathan stood. He was done with the kitchen table. In the morning he called Hector before 7, and they talked for an hour on the rear porch. Hector gave his account quietly, methodically, with the shame of a man who had been compliant when he should have been insubordinate. He had seen Ruth's condition worsen through the winter. He had left firewood twice without authorization and been told to stop. He had observed Diana entertaining at the main house while Ruth's name was not mentioned to guests. He had heard Diana on one occasion describe Ruth to a dinner guest as Nathan's mother. She's very much a homebody, prefers to keep to herself. After Hector, Nathan called Claire Ashby and confirmed the forensic accounting engagement. Then he called Lionel and told him to have the protective filing ready. That afternoon, he arranged to have Ruth's furniture returned to her bedroom. He moved the bookcase himself with Hector's help. When he knocked on the guest suite door and told Ruth her room was ready, she walked down the hall, stood in the doorway, and looked at her window. "Good light," she said. "Always was," Nathan said. Ruth walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the mountain view she had looked at from this room for 7 years, before someone decided she should look at a river valley instead. She turned around. "Nathan. Mama. Did you find what you needed today getting there?" She nodded. "Then keep going." That evening, Nathan was in his office when he heard Diana's footsteps in the hall, a deliberate cadence stopping at his door. "A knock," he said. "Come in." She opened the door and stood in the frame. She was dressed for an event he hadn't been invited to. He recognized the particular care of her appearance as the kind she employed when she wanted to control a situation. "I think we should talk," she said. "The two of us. Tonight." Nathan looked at her. "All right," he said. "Let's talk." Claire Ashby called at 8:15 the following morning. Nathan took the call in the East Library with the door closed and a pad of paper on the desk in front of him, though he found himself barely writing. The numbers were clear enough that they didn't require annotation. Claire was methodical and precise. She'd built her practice on the kind of forensic work that family courts and fraud attorneys needed, which meant she had no softening of language when the numbers were this clear. Over 22 months, Diana had moved funds from 4 categories of joint holdings. The first category, joint brokerage accounts. 2 of the 4 accounts had been restructured with sole access provisions 18 months ago. From these, $1.4 million had been transacted into an LLC established in Diana's name, Harmon Ridge Capital, a Delaware entity filed without Nathan's knowledge. The second category, the Charleston property, a rental property Diana had brought into the marriage. Nathan had believed it was sold in 2019. It had not been sold. It had been quietly retained, refinanced 8 months ago through a lender Diana had used independently, and $800,000 in equity extracted. The monthly carrying cost had been paid from a joint household account. The third category, beneficiary restructuring. Nathan's life insurance policy, originally listing Ruth as secondary beneficiary, had been updated twice. The current document listed Harmon Ridge Capital as sole secondary beneficiary. The fourth category, 4 transfers totaling $900,000 from a joint savings account, characterized in the account records as estate planning contributions, moved to Harmon Ridge Capital over a period of 16 months. Total repositioned from joint holdings, approximately $3.1 million, Claire said. The LLC currently holds approximately $2.6 million in liquid assets. The remainder is in transit or has been used to fund operational costs of the entity. She paused. "Mr. Calloway, this is not estate planning. This is systematic asset extraction." "How long do you think she planned it?" The Delaware filing for Harmon Ridge Capital was submitted 23 months ago. The first transfer occurred 2 months after that. The timeline suggests the planning preceded the filing by at least several months. We're looking at a scheme that began in design, if not in execution, approximately 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years ago, before Nathan had gone to London, before Ruth had gone to the cabin. He thought about what Lionel had said. The cabin was part of the plan. Ruth would have noticed. Ruth managed household finances, knew the account structures, asked questions. If Diana was going to move $3.1 million without detection, She needed Ruth far from the kitchen table where the mail arrived, far from the conversations where account statements might be mentioned. The cabin was the prerequisite. He thanked Claire and asked her to send the preliminary report to Lionel by end of day. Then he called Lionel directly. "File the protective order," he said. "Today. All joint accounts. There's a risk she'll see the filing before we're ready to move on the divorce proceedings," Lionel said. "If she has the account set up to alert her." "I know. File it anyway." He thought of the business card, the circled date 2 weeks out. If she has a timeline, we're already behind it. I'd rather move now and deal with the response." Lionel filed at 11:15. Nathan received confirmation at noon. He was in the rear garden when his phone buzzed with a notification from the joint brokerage, a large wire transfer pending. $900,000. Authorization initiated from inside the estate network. The timestamp was 11:40, 25 minutes after the protective order was filed. Diana had been monitoring the filing in real time. He called Lionel immediately. Lionel contacted the brokerage's legal team. The protective order covered joint accounts pending divorce proceedings. The transfer was blocked on the brokerage's end within 7 minutes of Nathan's call. Nathan sat on the rear garden bench. He could hear the house. He could hear faintly the sound of Diana moving upstairs, a drawer opening, a phone call, her voice too low to make out. He waited. 20 minutes later, Diana appeared on the rear porch. She was carrying her phone and her composure was intact, barely but intact. She walked across the garden and sat beside him on the bench. She had, he thought, practiced this walk. You filed, she said. "I did. Without discussing it. You tried to transfer $900,000 while the ink was still wet on the protective order." He kept his voice level. "We're past the discussion stage." Diana looked at the tree line. "At the ridge path that disappeared into the forest. I would have given you a fair settlement," she said. "I was planning to approach you with what a fait accompli. The $3.1 million already in a Delaware LLC that I didn't know existed." She said nothing. "The company was filed 23 months ago," Nathan said. 2 months before I left for London. That's when you started this." He looked at her. "Was London your idea?" A long pause. "You were going regardless. The timing was right for the company. But it was convenient for you." She didn't answer. The silence had a particular quality. The silence of a person who has been caught in something they believed was airtight and is now doing rapid structural engineering on their position. "I'm going to ask you something," Nathan said. "And I want you to think about whether you want to answer honestly, because the answer determines what the next several months look like for both of us." He waited. Was moving Ruth to the cabin a condition of making this work? Did you need her out of the main house to do what you were doing with the accounts? Diana stood. She smoothed her jacket. "I think we should let our attorneys handle things from here," she said. She walked back to the house. Nathan looked at the ridge. Somewhere below in the empty cabin, the propane burner sat cold. The firewood was running low. He called Ruth's cell. She answered on the second ring. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm reading in my room." Her voice was measured. "Is everything happening?" "Everything is happening," he said. "Good," said Ruth. "Come sit with me when you can." Diana did not come down for dinner. Nathan ate at the kitchen table alone and let the quiet of the house settle around him. It was a particular kind of quiet, the silence of a building where two people are making calculations in separate rooms. He had expected her to ask for a conversation that evening. She had instead made 3 phone calls in her bedroom. He could hear the low cadence of her voice through the floor. Not the words, just the rhythm. Deliberate. Controlled. She was calling her attorney. He knew that the way he knew most things about how Diana moved through the world from pattern, from years of watching someone operate with precision. He wasn't wrong. Her attorney, Margaret Fossey, of a Raleigh firm specializing in high-asset divorce, sent Lionel a formal notification at 9:17 that evening. Diana Calloway was initiating divorce proceedings. She was prepared to negotiate a settlement. Lionel called Nathan immediately. "She's moving," he said. "She's going to frame this as a mutual decision dissolution of a marriage that had grown distant, reasonable division of assets. She'll characterize the account restructuring as estate planning you were aware of. Can she? Not easily. Not with Claire's report and Mara's evidence. But she'll try to muddy the timeline, make it look collaborative rather than unilateral." Lionel paused. "She'll also likely make a move regarding your mother. Characterize Ruth as a source of tension in the marriage. Paint the cabin as a comfortable arrangement that you approved, that Ruth preferred, and that Diana was unfairly blamed for after the fact." "She won't find it easy to paint," Nathan said, "given that Ruth wrote it down every day for 19 months. No, Lionel agreed. "She won't." He paused again. "Nathan, I want to recommend bringing in a co-counsel who specializes in elder financial exploitation. What Diana did to control your mother's communications and movements, keeping her isolated from you, intercepting your calls, using your name to enforce her compliance that has civil exposure for Diana beyond the divorce. Not criminal under current North Carolina statute given the specific circumstances, but civil. How significant? Significant enough that it changes her negotiating position considerably. She walked into this expecting to settle a divorce. She may be settling something larger." Nathan set the phone down on the kitchen table after the call ended. He sat for a moment with the specific silence of a man who is past the stage of hoping he's wrong about something and is now fully in the stage of correcting it. He went upstairs and knocked on Ruth's door. She answered in her robe book in hand, reading glasses on. The East Wing bedroom was warm. She'd turned on the radiator, and the room smelled faintly of the lavender she kept in a small sachet on the nightstand. One of 4 items she'd brought from the cabin, along with her medication and the composition notebook. "Sit down," she said, in the particular tone that meant it was not a suggestion. He sat in the armchair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed, closed. The book took off her glasses. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He told her the broad structure of it. The LLC, the accounts, the property, the total figure, the blocked transfer. He told her about Lionel's filing Diana's attorney, the direction of the next several weeks. Ruth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "She moved me to the cabin," Ruth said, "so I wouldn't notice the money." "That's what the timeline suggests." Ruth looked at her hands. "I noticed other things," she said. "I noticed when the household accounts stopped coming in the mail. I noticed when the utility summaries stopped appearing in the kitchen. I noticed when Diana changed the estate's bookkeeping service without mentioning it." She paused. "I asked her about the bookkeeping once. She said you'd wanted to streamline. She said the new service was more efficient. What did you think? I thought, this is a woman who is doing something she doesn't want me to see." Ruth looked up. "I wrote it in the journal. December 19th. That was the entry." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Why didn't you find a way to reach me directly? Even one call?" Ruth looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because I wasn't sure," she said. "I was 68 years old, living in a cabin because someone told me my son thought it was better for everyone. And every time I thought, this is wrong, Diana is lying, this is a scheme. I also thought, what if I'm the problem? What if I've become the kind of person who sees conspiracy in efficiency, who makes family difficulty where there is only adjustment?" She paused. "Nathan, I have watched powerful women be dismissed their entire lives because they were told their perception was the issue. I did not want to become someone who cried wolf and was wrong. You weren't wrong. I know that now. She said it without satisfaction, but I didn't know it when I was sitting in that cabin deciding whether to walk 40 minutes uphill in the dark to use a neighbor's phone. He thought about that. About the 40 minutes about the dark, about a 68-year-old woman making that calculation alone. I'm sorry I wasn't here, he said. Ruth looked at him steadily. You being sorry is a place to start, she said. It's not a destination. She picked up her book again, not to read, just to have something in her hands. What happens to Diana divorce proceedings? Financial recovery through the courts. Civil exposure on the isolation. He paused. Lionel says she'll negotiate. She'll negotiate, Ruth agreed. She knew Diana well enough for that. And you? Nathan looked at the window. Dark outside, mountain dark, the kind that is complete. I've asked Ethan to take the European lead. I'm restructuring my schedule. Ruth put her glasses back on, opened her book to where she'd left off. Good, she said. He sat with her for another hour, not talking, reading his own phone while she read her book. The radiator ticked. The house was quiet around them. When he stood to leave, Ruth looked up briefly. Nathan. Mama, she used my love for you as the mechanism. Ruth's voice was precise without heat. Every lie she told me was dressed as something you wanted. Every diminishment was framed as your preference. That's the thing that mattered, not the cabin, not the isolation. That she knew my attachment to you well enough to weaponize it. He stood in the doorway. He didn't have an answer for that. She hadn't asked for one. Good night, she said, and turned the page. The formal conversation with Diana happened the next morning in the study. Nathan had chosen the room deliberately. It was his room with his desk and his books and his view of the front drive. He had cleared the surface of everything but 2 glasses of water, and Claire Ashby's preliminary report face down in front of Diana's chair. Diana arrived precisely on time. She was in a gray sweater, hair back, expression composed. She had, Nathan noticed, dressed down slightly, an unconscious negotiating signal or a conscious one. With Diana, the distinction rarely mattered. She sat across from him. She did not look at the folder. I want to start by saying, she began, that I understand you're angry. I understand the situation looks. Turn the folder over, Nathan said. A pause. She turned it over. She looked at the first page, Claire's summary, the totals, the categories. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. This is a forensic accounting document, Nathan said. Preliminary, final report in 10 days. Every transfer, every account, every beneficiary, change, every transaction in and out of Harmon Ridge Capital from the date of its Delaware filing. He paused. 23 months ago. Diana set the report down. Her expression was still controlled, but the control was now visible in a way it hadn't been before, actively maintained rather than natural. I can explain the financial structure, she said. You've told me that before. You also told me my mother chose to live at the river cabin. You told me the bookkeeping change was for efficiency. You told me Ruth's phone was upgraded for billing reasons. He kept his voice even. Diana, I don't think explaining is the right mode here. Then what is the right mode? Honesty about what you were doing and why. He leaned forward. Not for my sake. Not even for Ruth's sake. Because the alternative, the litigation version of this, exposes you to civil claims for elder financial exploitation and isolation that your attorney knows are not going to go well for you in a North Carolina court. Especially with a composition notebook that documents 19 months of your instructions and a former employee with audio recordings. Diana looked at him. Her stillness now was different. Not composure, but the stillness of someone calculating remaining options and finding them reduced. "I want to ask you something," Nathan said. "And I'm asking it once." He waited. Was moving Ruth to the cabin part of the financial plan? Did you need her out of the main house to do this without her noticing? A long silence. "Yes," Diana said. The word sat in the room. Nathan exhaled slowly. He hadn't known whether she would answer honestly. She had more to lose from honesty than from denial. That she had answered told him something about the state of her calculations. She would have noticed, Diana said. She knew the accounts. She asked questions. She had opinions about everything, every vendor, every service, every financial decision. "You were in London. I was here. I was running this house, managing your schedule, managing her, and she treated every decision I made as something requiring her review." Her voice had gone flat factual. "I needed space to work. She wouldn't give it. So you created space. I created an arrangement that gave her a cabin in the forest in December." Nathan stood. "Ruth is 69 years old. She has arthritis. Her rheumatology appointment was rescheduled without her knowledge because you required your approval for her medical transportation. She spent 19 months believing that I thought she was in the way." He paused. "She wrote it down every day because she needed something true to hold on to." Diana said nothing. "Lionel will send you the terms this afternoon," Nathan said. "You retain your personal accounts, your personal property. The estate, the joint holdings, and the assets in Harmon Ridge Capital are subject to the divorce proceedings and the fraudulent transfer claims. You'll have until the end of the week to vacate the property." Diana stood. She smoothed her sweater. The composed expression had returned, not warm now, just smooth. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You moved my mother into the woods," Nathan said. "Nothing after that was going to be easy." She left the room without another word. Nathan sat alone in the study for a while. He could hear faintly Diana moving upstairs, the sound of closet doors, the muted impact of luggage. She was starting. He sent 2 texts, one to Lionel, confirming the terms conversation had occurred, and asking for the paperwork to be sent that afternoon. One to Ethan in London, letting him know the situation had resolved to the point where Nathan could confirm the leadership restructuring by end of week. Then he went to find his mother. Ruth was in the kitchen. She had found the coffee and made a pot, and she was standing at the counter looking out the window at the rear garden, both hands around a mug. She heard him come in and turned. "She's packing," Nathan said. Ruth looked at him steadily. "Good." She turned back to the window. "The garden needs attention. Hector's been managing it alone." Nathan poured himself coffee. Stood beside her at the window. Outside, the October light was doing the thing it does in the mountains, coming in low and golden through the bare branches, making the whole rear property look briefly gilded. "Mara's coming tomorrow," Nathan said. "I'd like to offer her the position back." Ruth made a small sound that might have been approval. "She'll set conditions." I told her she could. They stood at the window together and drank their coffee. After a while, Ruth said, "Nathan." He waited. "Whatever you're restructuring, the schedule, the work, all of it. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's the right way to live." She paused. "I don't want to be the reason you change. I want to be the reason you realize you already needed to." Nathan looked at the garden at the ridge path that disappeared into the trees at the back of the property. "I know," he said. The days after Diana's departure had a particular quality that Nathan had not expected. He had expected the house to feel emptier. Instead, it felt larger, not hollow, but expanded, as if certain rooms had been returned to a natural size after being compressed for a long time. The kitchen was louder. The rear garden got attention. Hector worked with something that looked for the first time in months like ease. Diana left on a Thursday. Her attorney sent paperwork Friday morning. The terms negotiation moved quickly faster than Lionel had anticipated, and Nathan thought he understood why. Diana was intelligent, and she could read exposure. The civil elder isolation claim, the fraudulent transfer documentation, the composition notebook, Mara's recordings, it was not a position from which you fight a long war. You cut your losses, you retain what is defensible, you move. She retained her personal accounts and personal property. The estate, the joint holdings, and the assets repositioned to Harmon Ridge Capital were addressed through the divorce decree and a parallel civil settlement. The total recovered slightly over $2.8 million, meaning Diana had spent approximately $300,000 from the repositioned funds in the course of the scheme. Lionel called it a strong outcome. Nathan did not feel strongly about the number either way. The thing that mattered was the composition notebook. Not as evidence, though it had been central to everything as an object. He'd asked Ruth if she wanted it back. She'd said he could keep it. He set it on his desk in the East Library and did not open it again. He didn't need to read it. He knew what was in it. He knew what it had cost his mother to write it. 2 weeks after Diana's departure, Mara arrived on a Tuesday morning in her own car with 2 bags in the back seat. She walked through the main house slowly, room by room, the way someone walks through a place they have responsibility for and are taking stock of what needs attention. She opened windows. She ran her hand along a windowsill, examined the dust. She said nothing critical. She simply assessed. When she reached the east wing and Ruth's bedroom, she knocked. Ruth opened the door. The 2 women looked at each other. Mara said, "Good to see you back where you belong, Mrs. Calloway." Ruth stepped back and held the door open. "Mara, come in." Nathan didn't hear what they said. He walked away down the hall and gave them the room. That evening, Nathan called Ethan in London. The call lasted 40 minutes longer than he'd planned, but the European situation had several moving pieces that required his attention before he could formally step back. Ethan was capable and careful, and he had been the de facto lead in London for months, even when Nathan's name was on the decisions. The formal restructuring was largely a ratification of something that had already happened. They agreed on a transition period of 6 weeks, regular check-ins, quarterly visits. "How long are you planning to be in North Carolina?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Nathan said. "Long enough. I'll need a better answer eventually." "I know." He paused. "You'll have it eventually." After the call, he sat in the East Library for a while. The composition notebook was on the corner of his desk. He looked at it, then looked away. He thought about what Ruth had said. "Don't do it for me. Do it because it's the right way to live." He had been building for 20 years. He had built something real and significant, and he was not sorry for it. But he had built it with an assumption that distance was a cost he was paying, rather than a cost that others were paying on his behalf. He had sent money and called on weekends and trusted the people he left in charge, and he had told himself this was responsibility. It was provision. Provision was not the same as presence. Ruth knocked on the library door at 9:30. She came in without waiting for an answer, a habit she'd never lost, even in the years when he'd have a staff member intercept before she reached his office. She sat in the chair across from his desk. "You're thinking," she said. "I'm thinking." About, he looked at the notebook. "About how long I should have come back before I did." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You came back when you came back. The question of when you should, that's for the past to hold." She folded her hands in her lap. "The question of what you do now is for you. I know. Do you?" He looked at her. I think so. Ruth studied him the way she had studied him his entire life, with the particular attention of someone who takes human character seriously and is not interested in being told what she wants to hear. You looked at this house, she said, for 14 months from a distance and assumed it was whole because someone told you it was. You accepted the version you were given because the alternative required you to stop. She paused. I'm not reproaching you. I'm telling you what I know about you. You are very good at building. You are not as good at being still and looking at what you've already built. Nathan said nothing. That's what I need you to be better at, Ruth said. Not here for my sake. Here in the sense of being present to what is actually happening, not the version that's convenient. She uncrossed her ankles. Can you do that? I'm going to try, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood. Good, she said. Tea, please. She went to the kitchen. He followed. The legal calendar moved faster than divorce proceedings usually do when one party's position is thoroughly documented. Lionel attributed this to Diana's attorney's realism. Margaret Foss was experienced enough to know when the numbers and the evidence made a long fight inadvisable. The final settlement hearing was a Tuesday in late November, 6 weeks after Nathan had landed at Asheville Regional with his carry-on and his assumptions. Nathan attended with Lionel. Diana attended with Fossey. They did not sit near each other. They did not speak directly. The terms were as Lionel had outlined. Diana retained her personal accounts, her jewelry, the vehicle she'd purchased in her name 2 years ago, and her personal property. The estate, the joint brokerage accounts, and the assets in Harmon Ridge Capital, subject to the fraudulent transfer recovery, were returned to Nathan's sole holding. The civil elder exploitation claim was settled separately outside the courtroom with an additional financial provision that Nathan had stipulated not as punishment, but because Lionel told him it mattered for the civil record and for Ruth's dignity. When the hearing concluded, Fossey gathered her files without comment and left. Diana looked at Nathan once across the room before she followed her attorney. Her expression was not angry. It was something more precise than anger, the look of someone who has been thoroughly outmaneuvered and knows it, and has already begun calculating what comes after. Nathan did not hold her gaze. He had nothing left to say to her through eye contact or otherwise. He turned to Lionel and said, "Thank you." Lionel shook his hand. "Take care of your mother," he said. "That's the idea." He drove home through the mountains in the November light. The leaves were fully down now, the hardwoods bare, the ridgelines sharp and clear in the way they only get once the canopy is gone. He drove without music. He thought about the hearing briefly, and then he thought about the porch Hector had repaired while he was in the middle of everything, new boards, solid, properly pitched, so rain ran off the edge instead of pooling. Ruth was in the kitchen when he came in. Mara was there too, organizing the refrigerator with the quiet authority of someone who has returned to a space they know well and is setting it right. The kitchen smelled of something on the stove, soup, something hearty, and the radio on the counter was playing low. Ruth looked up when Nathan came through the door. She read his face. "It's done," she said. "It's done." She nodded once. She turned back to whatever she was chopping. Mara said nothing and kept working. Nathan sat at the kitchen table. He took off his jacket. He sat in the chair that had always been the one he sat in when he came down for breakfast, as a young man visiting the one closest to the window, and he looked out at the rear garden and the ridge path and the bare tree line. It was done. The legal architecture was in place. Diana was gone. The accounts were restored. Ruth was here in the kitchen, making dinner with Mara because she belonged in this house, and that was now uncontested. He thought, this is what it looks like when something is right again. He called Ethan after dinner. Brief check in 30 minutes. The London deal they'd been monitoring had moved forward. Ethan had handled a board question without needing Nathan's intervention, and Nathan told him he'd handled it correctly. Ethan mentioned he'd had his first meeting in Nathan's place with the Munich clients. They'd responded well. He was cautious, but not modest about it. "You don't need me to do that anymore," Nathan said. "I know," Ethan said. "I still want the check-in." "You'll have it." After the call, Nathan went out to the rear porch. The November night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars sharp. He could see the tree line at the back of the property, the ridge path disappearing into the dark. He could not see the river valley from here, it was too far, too deep in the forest. But he knew the river was there. He knew the cabin was there, empty now, the propane canister gone, the duct tape on the window replaced with proper weather stripping, because Hector had seen to it. He stood on the porch for a while. The screen door opened behind him. Ruth came out with her coat on and 2 mugs of tea. She handed him one. "Cold," she said. "Earning it." She stood beside him. They looked at the tree line. "Mara says the rhododendrons on the south slope need attention," Ruth said. "She thinks we should bring someone in specifically for that. I'll ask Hector who he recommends. He'll have a name. He always has a name for people who know plants." They drank their tea. The mountain dark was complete at the edges of the property, just the porch light and the kitchen window behind them, making a small, warm circle. Nathan Ruth said, "Mama, I want you to hear me say this clearly so you have it." She held the mug in both hands, looking at the ridge. "You were not the reason this happened. Your absence enabled it. That's not the same thing." She paused. Diana made a choice. She is responsible for that choice. You are responsible for being present going forward. Those are separate accounts. He thought about the composition notebook on his desk. About the entry for October 14th, the very first one. "I kept this here so I could remember that the version of you Diana described was not the version I raised." "I understand the difference," he said. "Good." She finished her tea. "Then we're clear." She went back inside. He heard the screen door, the kitchen sounds resuming, Mara saying something and Ruth responding with a short laugh. The kitchen light held warm and steady in the dark mountain evening. Nathan stayed on the porch a little longer. He looked at the ridge. He thought about what it meant to stay, not the word, the practice. Not staying until the next obligation, not staying until London needed him. Staying in the sense of becoming native to a place again. Learning its rhythms. Knowing when the rhododendrons needed attention, and what Hector would recommend, and whether the weather coming off the ridge was the kind that meant rain by morning. He thought, "I know how to build. I am learning how to remain." He went inside. 3 weeks after the settlement, Ruth asked if he wanted to walk to the river. He had not expected that. He said so. "It's a river," she said. "It was always beautiful. I just didn't want to be down there by myself anymore." They went on a Saturday morning late enough that the frost had burned off the path. Hector had been clearing the trail since the week Nathan came home. The branches pushed back the underbrush, cut down along both edges, the footing visible and solid. It still took 40 minutes. The mountains don't compress distance for convenience. The November forest was stripped and spare every tree visible to its full architecture, now that the leaves were down. The light came through at long angles, low and clean the way it does in late autumn, when the sun never quite reaches the meridian. Beneath their feet, the fallen leaves were wet and soft, and the path smelled of leaf mold and cold stone. Nathan heard the river before he saw the cabin. That particular sound of moving water over rock, continuous, indifferent to everything that had happened in the valley since March of the previous year. The river didn't know. The river simply ran. They came out of the trees into the clearing and stood in front of the cabin. The propane canister was gone. The firewood stack had been removed, the tarp folded away. Hector had replaced the duct tape on the window with proper weather stripping, as Nathan had asked. The door was padlocked. The structure itself was still standing, would continue standing for years. It was well built, just not well suited. Ruth looked at it for a long moment. "I thought about a lot of things down here," she said. "I know. I thought about what I should have done differently. Whether there was a point where I should have walked up the hill, regardless of what Diana told me you wanted." She paused. "And I kept coming back to the same place. I was doing what I raised you to do. I was not making accusations without being sure. I was documenting, waiting, trying to be careful." She looked at the river. The journal was the right decision. The passive waiting probably wasn't. You were 68 alone and being systematically told that your perception was wrong. "I know what I was." She said it without irritation. "I also know that my mother would have walked up that hill." A pause. "But my mother also raised me in a harder time, and sometimes I think the thing she gave me, that caution, that willingness to absorb before acting, was right for her world and slightly mismatched to mine." She looked at him. "What I gave you was similar. You absorb before acting. You trust before verifying. It built something real. It also left me here for 19 months. Nathan had no answer to that. He didn't try to give one. They walked to the porch and sat in the 2 chairs, which were still there, weather-worn but solid. The river moved past in the middle distance, running fast over the rocks where the channel narrowed. Ruth's coffee had come in a thermos from the kitchen. She poured 2 cups and handed one across. "I'm not angry," she said. "I want you to understand that. I passed through angry sometime around month 12, and what I found on the other side was something more useful." She looked at the water. "I was very glad you didn't know. Because if you had known and done nothing, I would have lost something I didn't want to lose." "What?" "The version of you I kept in my head down here." She looked at him. "The version that was smart and honest and building something that mattered. I needed that version to be real when you finally showed up." She paused. "I needed you to come home and be the person I raised, not the person she described. And you did." Nathan looked at the river. It moved. It didn't care about any of it. That was, he thought, a kind of comfort. "I'm going to build something better here," he said. "Not instead of London. Different from it. Something that doesn't require me to be 4,000 miles away to function." "I know," Ruth said. "It might take a few years. I've been waiting for you for 14 months. I think I can manage a few years." She said it without reproach. Just fact. They sat by the river until the thermos was empty, and the November light began to thin toward afternoon. Then they walked back up the ridge, 40 minutes, the path better than it had been, the forest open and cold around them. When they came out onto the rear lawn of the main house, the kitchen lights were on. Mara's car was in the drive. The chimney above the living room was drawing. Ruth stopped at the base of the porch steps. She put her foot on the first one. The wood held Hector's new boards, solid, properly set. She climbed the 3 steps and stood on the porch. She turned around and looked at the ridge path they'd just come up from the tree line at the back of the property, the sky going pale over the far mountains. She turned back to Nathan, who had come up beside her. "Are you staying?" she asked. He looked at the house, the porch, the windows, the front door with its 2 solid hinges. He looked at the ridge. "I'm restructuring," he said. "What does that mean?" He opened the front door for her. "It means I'm here," he said. Ruth walked inside. Nathan followed and let the door close behind them. Through the kitchen window, the 2 of them moved toward the table, and Mara set down cups of tea without being asked, stepping back out of the frame, leaving them to it. The porch was empty. The path disappeared into the forest. The river ran somewhere below in the valley, moving fast over the cold rocks, indifferent and steady the way something sounds when it has always been there, and will continue to be there long after the people who sat beside it have settled whatever it was they needed to settle. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, or tell us in the comments, what does it mean to you to finally come home